Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of our Longevity Futures. I'm your host, Chris Curwen, and today I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Dr. Greg Fahy. Dr. Fahy is a world-renowned cryobiologist and is also the Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Interstitial Immune, a company which pioneers treatments for thymus regeneration and age-related immune system decline. So today we're going to be talking about his work and its implications on our longevity futures. So thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Fahy.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'll dive straight into the questions. And what actually started off your interest in the longevity field? And what has your journey been like to lead you to where you are now?
Well, I got interested in aging when I was in high school. Actually, earlier than that, I was interested in aging when I was in elementary school. But in high school, I read Alex Comfort's book, The Process of Aging. And it was fascinating and started me thinking about what aging is and whether it can be modified. And so that was kind of the jumping off point. I started reading papers on molecular biology when I was in the 7th grade, junior high school, because I wanted to sort of prepare myself to know something about aging. And when I was an undergraduate at University of California at Irvine, I actually team taught a course about aging to undergraduates there. So I've been interested in the field for a long time, and it's partly because I was inspired by very talented people who were investigators themselves.
Great. And so you're currently the Chief Science Officer of Interstitial Immune, as I mentioned. Could you just tell me a little bit about your work there and what you're doing at the moment?
Yes. So the main activity of Interstitial Immune at the moment is to conduct the TRIM-X trial. So some time ago, we did a trial called the TRIM trial, standing for thymus regeneration, immunorestoration, and insulin mitigation. And that was pretty successful. And I'm sure we'll be talking more about that in a bit. But it was just one trial, and we need to replicate the results and extend it to different categories of person, such as women and older people and younger people. So that's what we're doing now. We've enrolled something like 15 people so far. We continue to enroll 1 or 2 cohorts every month, and we'll continue to do that until we run out of volunteers. But our goal is to hit somewhere around 80 to 100 people in the second trial. And that takes a lot of work. So that's the main thing that we do.
So we'll definitely dive into that a little bit deeper later on in the questions. But can you just give us a brief summary of what the thymus is and what is its function in the immune system and in the body in its entirety?
Sure. So the thymus is sometimes called the master gland of the immune system. It's located in your chest cavity, but beneath your breastbone. And its job is to manufacture T cells. And T cells are named T cells because they are educated in the thymus. So bone marrow precursor cells migrate through the bloodstream, go to the thymus, and are trained to do positive and negative selection. So positive selection relates to the development of T cells that can attack foreign antigens and defend you against antigens on organisms and cancer cells, for example. And then negative selection is the last class that the T cell has to go to before it can graduate from the finishing school of the thymus. And negative selection involves being sure not to attack yourself as foreign. And that turns out to be a very important process as well. So T cells, once they pass both of those hurdles, are then released into the bloodstream and defend you without attacking you.
So
very simply.
So what role does it have to play in aging? So obviously it's very important in the immune system, and obviously the immune system is something that is affected by age. Is that because of deterioration of the thymus?
Right. So this gets us into a deeper question about, where does aging come from? What is aging? There are different schools of thought about this, but the thymus is really, I think, an excellent example of my school of thought, which is that aging is actually an act of commission. It's not an act of omission, at least not entirely. And in this case, the commission is very evident because there are programs that are common to all vertebrate species and certainly to all humans that cause your thymus to start deteriorating really from birth, but primarily it really accelerates around the time of puberty. So it seems to be some kind of clock mechanism in which the thymus involutes in response to sex hormone production at puberty, and then that is continued to be affected by the decline of growth hormone and probably other hormones as we get older beyond puberty. So the thymus process of deterioration is called involution. And it's this involution of the thymus that leads to long-term consequences for aging. So the T cells that the thymus makes are long-lived. So you can do things like take somebody's thymus out in youth and not have any effect on their immune function some years afterwards. And you can undergo normal age-related thymic involution and still maintain a good immune system until you're 60 years of age. But somewhere between 60 and 80, you lose about 98% of your ability to recognize foreign antigens, and that obviously is not good for you. And coincident with that, we see a large increase in morbidity and mortality. And there, it's just a bit of a coincidence that people tend to die in large numbers around the time their thymus stops working. I think it may be more than just a coincidence. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on, but some of those things relate to the integrity of your immune system. For example, age-related inflammation is probably associated with vascular disease, and vascular disease is associated with heart disease, which is the major killer that we're all involved in. So what would happen if we didn't have age-related inflammation? And is age-related inflammation related to the aging of your thymus, which normally would prevent inflammation from developing? So there's a lot of questions that are yet to be answered about exactly how the thymus relates to aging, but those are some of the superficial questions. And I would also just mention circumstantially that there are studies in mouse models that show that if you take a thymus from a young syngeneic mouse, transplant it into an old mouse, it rejuvenates aspects of brain physiology, liver physiology, thyroid physiology, and insulin physiology. So there may be deep connections between the aging of the immune system, which is largely driven by thymic involution, and aging in general.
So am I right in thinking, obviously, when we think of the immune system, I imagine a lot of people will think, that fights off infectious diseases coming in from external factors. But it's not just important in that, is it? It's much more broad than just infectious disease.
Yes, that's right. Well, for example, cancer. So it's been a little bit hard to prove the connection between thymus involution and increased risk of cancer, but there has been some study of the fate of people who get cancer and what their thymus is doing, what their immune system is doing at the time that they get it or don't get it. And if you look at it at that level of granularity, then you find there's a very strong correlation between thymic function and the ability to resist the development of cancer. And there are theories that say that we all get cancer several times in our lifespan, but we never notice it because the immune system cleans up the cells. As we get older, we develop things like PD-1, which inhibits the ability of the immune system to attack cancer. And one of the things we saw in our trial, for example, is that by restoring immune system function, the PD-1 just goes down naturally to where it was in youth. So it seems like the aging of the thymus is related to a lot of other things that happen to us as we get older.
So one question that we actually had from one of our friends was, are we able to grow a thymus in the lab? And I know it might be quite a leap to get there, but if not, how far away are we from that if it is in the foreseeable future?
Right. So this is something I have not really done my homework on, but I know that the SENS Foundation has been quite interested in this. They have contracted with the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine to actually do just this, to grow thymuses in a dish. And in theory, that may have some applications, particularly for people who as I said before, may have had their thymus removed when they were children to treat some disease without really much attention being paid to the long-term consequences of doing that. And so if you don't have a thymus that you can regrow, the only other option that you have is to make one in a lab and then transplant that. Obviously, that's a very long-term project, and we're focused at Interstitial Immune on what we can do right now. So we prefer to regrow the thymus that you already have. That sets aside a lot of unknown questions about the fidelity of the thymus you may grow in a lab dish versus the thymus that you already are relying on for maintaining your health. And it saves us from having to wait for 20 years for the FDA to approve the process. But in theory, it's not a terrible approach. The only thing about it is that we have to go back again to what is driving the involution of the thymus in the first place. So Aubrey and the SENS Foundation tends to think of aging as wear and tear. In other words, it's just the accumulation of damage. And so if the thymus is just damaged, then you replace it with a fresh, undamaged thymus, you should be good for another 60 years. But it doesn't work that way. So for example, in the mouse thymus transplant experiments I was describing before, once you transplant that thymus, it works for a while, for maybe a month or so, but then it stops working. And it's not because it gets rejected, it's because it doesn't have the hormonal signals that it needs to keep going. So the old environment is not conducive to the maintenance of thymic function. The thymus is supposed to be involuted as we get older. Anytime after puberty or so, your thymus is involuted, and it takes a long time for that process to go to completion. But if you take a fresh laboratory-grown thymus and you put it into an older person, it will be okay for a while, but then it's going to start involuting to go back to where you were before you got the transplant. And the window of time in which it's active may not be long enough for you to derive any substantial benefit from it for the long-term function of your immune system. So even if you were to make thymuses in a lab and transplant them, you're still going to have to do something like what we do to support that thymus long enough for it to produce enough T cells to make a difference for your future.
So on the topic of thymus regeneration, in September 2019, you published a paper on a study in which a cocktail of 3 drugs, DHEA, I think it's metformin and then GH, but correct me if I'm wrong, seemed to reverse the biological age of humans by about between 2 and 2.5 years. Could you give us a bit more details of this study, the original purpose, and the effect on the thymus, and how did you measure the age?
Right. So that's a lot of questions, but we'll go through some of them. Right. So the drug cocktail is a combination of growth hormone, DHEA, and metformin. And the growth hormone is what regenerates the thymus. So we've known since 1986 that if you continuously expose an old rat to growth hormone, the incredibly deteriorated thymus, which looks nothing like a normal thymus, both histologically and physically, the thymus actually shrinks down to a size that was so small that they couldn't even weigh it in the study. It looks like a glob of fat, but you can still bring that thymus back by giving the animals cells that secrete growth hormone constitutively, pituitary adenoma cells in particular. And they found that when they did that, not only did the thymus come back to its normal morphology, but T cell ability to respond to foreign antigens was restored back to the levels seen for a 3-month-old rat. So that caught my attention. Everybody else ignored it. And so the TRIM trial was designed to see if we could do something like that in humans. And what I did not know at the time is that Laura Napolitano and a few other laboratories were brave enough to try this to combat HIV, AIDS patients whose immune systems were being destroyed by the HIV virus. And they got positive results, but my study on myself, my N is equal to 1 study on myself, got published before any of them published their stuff. And I showed in my own self-study that using growth hormone and DHEA allowed me to develop statistical proof of the regeneration of the functional part of my own thymus at least based on MRI investigations. So why DHEA plus growth hormone? So growth hormone regrows the thymus. Why do you need the DHEA? You need the DHEA because growth hormone has a side effect. And people have linked IGF-1 and growth hormone to pro-aging processes, but there hasn't been that much attention to mechanisms by which that might happen, in particular to the role of insulin. So one of the drawbacks to growth hormone is that it raises insulin levels, and insulin is a very pro-aging factor. And it may be that the drawbacks of growth hormone administration are largely driven by this side effect of hyperinsulinemia. And I asked myself a question before I did my own self experiment. Why is it that if you give growth hormone to an older person, their insulin levels go up, but a young person is replete in growth hormone and has low levels of insulin? What's the difference? And I just speculated that the difference could be that young people have large amounts of DHEA in their bloodstreams as well, and that maybe a hidden, unknown effect of DHEA is to actually block the hyperinsulinemic effect of growth hormone. So I gave myself growth hormone for a week. My insulin levels went up by about 50%. I maintained the same level of growth hormone for another week, but I added DHEA, and my insulin levels went right back down to baseline. I did this several times over the course of about 10 years. I always got the same response. And even though it's just me, you do it enough times, you can achieve statistical significance, which, it proved that it worked, at least in me. So one of the things we wanted to find out in the TRIM trial is if it worked in other people. The answer to that, although we didn't really dwell on it in the paper because these papers are very limited in terms of space that you have available, but we did find that DHEA has similar effects in men in general. And then the last component was metformin, because in some cases the DHEA is not sufficient, and so you need extra help in bringing down your insulin levels. So we really like metformin because it has a lot of positive effects in addition to its ability to lower insulin levels.
Yeah, but I mean, that was going to be a point I was going to raise. Was that chosen because it had shown some other longevity based benefits?
It was chosen mostly because it is probably the best anti-diabetic drug that there is. But on top of that, I was involved in some studies with Steve Spindler at the University of California at Riverside, in which Steve was looking at the transcriptomic signature of calorie restriction in older mice. You put an old mouse on CR, and its physiological indices all go back to something that looks like a younger mouse. And so you can track that in terms of transcriptomic changes using, at the time what we had available was these DNA microchips, that could track the transcriptome without the need to do a lot of sequencing. And what we found is that the signature of calorie restriction in old animals was replicated even better by metformin than by calorie restriction itself. So the animals looked more calorie restricted on metformin than they did on calorie restriction. So that was another thing that caught my attention about it. And then, of course, later, Barzilai came along promoting metformin for this and other reasons. It has anti-cancer effects. It's just a very good drug. And one of the things that attracted us to it as well is that if you take insulin to lower your blood sugar levels, you can overdo it and have your sugar levels crash, and you can end up in a diabetic coma. And that essentially does not happen with metformin. It does not have a tendency to lower your sugar levels down to sub-physiological values. So it was also a very safe drug, and we wanted it for that reason as well.
So, as I mentioned, some of the results, or I believe it was almost an afterthought to actually contact, I think it's Dr. Steve Horvath, to get a measure of the participants' biological age. And it was found through using the Horvath clock that the age of these participants had actually almost reversed by almost over 2 years. So how Can we call this true age reversal, do you think?
Let me just comment on the Horvath part of the story, just to clarify that aspect of it, because it's kind of interesting. We didn't really have any high hopes that we're going to see much in the epigenetic aging space, but we wanted to find out. We really, really wanted to find out, but we didn't know Steve. And so Bobby contrived this seminar series that he put on through a fictitious organization called Renaissance Biology, whose purpose was to invite Steve to give seminars at UCLA about the clock, which gave us a chance to meet him and interact with him. And after a couple of years of that, we told him about the trial, and he said, "Oh, I would be happy to analyze your results." So we got the results analyzed, and he was also kind and gracious enough to do this for us without charging us for it, which was really good because we had like no money. We still had to pay a lot to get the DNA analyzed in terms of the CPG site inventory in the genome. But then armed with that, Steve was able to take that data and run the clocks for us. And actually, when Steve first so he ran his original Horvath DNA methylation clock first, and he was kind of floored because he actually saw a reversal of epigenetic aging in our guys. So we had 9 guys aged, as it happened, just based on the luck of the draw, 51 to 65 years of age. We had specified 50 to 65, but we didn't get anyone who was 50. And, that's a very small number of people. And these epigenetic aging clocks have a fair amount of scatter associated with them. But we normalized everybody to themselves at baseline. So we subtracted out a lot of the noise in the data. And what Steve was able to show was that 1 year after the beginning of the treatment, the volunteers' biological age was 1.5 years less than it had been at the beginning of the treatment, even though the treatment itself had taken a year to unfold. So that meant that compared to sitting on the couch and doing nothing, which you would have been a year older, we were actually 2.5 years younger than what would have otherwise been the case. So we first had to reverse the 1 year of forward time that the trial took, and then on top of that, another 1.5 years. So Steve, is highly sought after in gerontology. People sent him all kinds of samples from all kinds of creatures and things and trials. And he had never seen actual aging reversal show up before. So to have this show up for the first time in a population of older guys, human beings, was pretty noteworthy. And so he had to prove to himself that it wasn't some kind of fluke. So he just took it on himself to run 3 additional clocks: the PhenoAge clock, the Hannum clock, and the GrimAge clock. And they all, measure aging in different ways, and they were all different in the details of the response that they showed, but qualitatively they were all exactly the same. And overall, each individual clock showed highly significant results, and in combination, they showed even stronger significant results. So by 9 months of treatment, on average, across all of the clocks, we were younger, than we were at the beginning of the trial, and the significance increased significantly as we went the extra 3 months at the end of the trial to the 12-month point, and then the result persisted based on the average of all of the clocks 6 months after the end of the trial as well. We were still quite statistically significantly younger than we would have been if we had not been in the trial. So I do think that this points to a real global aging reversal effect. And that's for 2 reasons. Number one, the Horvath clocks and these other clocks are measuring something general about aging. It's not just related to changing immune cell populations in the bloodstream. Some of the clocks are more sensitive to that than others, but it didn't seem to matter they all showed the same response. And furthermore, the changes in immune system function didn't really correlate well with the changes in epigenetic aging. So we showed improvements in the immune response. We showed improvements in the structure of the thymus, but the epigenetic aging reversal that we saw, even though it may relate in part to those immune system changes, there seems to be a dimension to the treatment that goes beyond just the immune system changes itself and is independent. And it's interesting to think about why that may have happened. It's nothing that we could have really predicted in advance, but we can kind of rationalize it in various ways now that we have seen those results. So the other thing I want to say about, is it real? Is it actual general aging reversal? Is that we did see other signs that can be interpreted as general aging reversal. For example, hair color coming back. And
I saw the pictures of that recently, and that really is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we just had no concept that that was going to happen, so we didn't take photographs of everybody before and after. In the current trial, we're doing that. Part of the screening step is to have your hair photographed, so we can see if we can document this again. But we saw there's one paper in the literature in which old women given growth hormone had an improvement in kidney function. And I wasn't aware of that paper at the time, but we saw that there's a statistically significant improvement in kidney function, at least based on estimated GFR over time. And that it seemed like that improvement continued to increase. In other words, the kidneys continued to improve even 6 months after the trial, although we are not able to prove that latter point statistically because we were only able to follow up on 6 of the guys, and the statistics are just not good enough with 6 people. But it's a straight line through all of the data points, including out to that last point. So we're hopeful that there may actually be an effect even after we stopped treatment. And of course, normally your kidneys just are not going to get better as you get older. So the implication is that there may be something else going on. And so there's a few things, like that led us to believe that perhaps there was a global anti-aging effect going on. And then when Steve's clock results came in, they seemed to confirm that. So I'm not going to say that every aspect of aging was reversed, because I can tell you right off the bat that we know of one aspect of aging that was not reversed, at least not in blood cells, and that's the telomere aspect of aging. So we went to a very good company and had the telomere length, and in fact they were very gracious. They gave me the entire distribution of telomere lengths for every individual for all of the blood samples, and you see all these bell-shaped curves, and they're just all superimposed on each other for the most part. There may be tiny effects, showing an improvement in telomere length, but I wouldn't make anything out of those results. So, and I kind of expected the telomeres to improve for various reasons, but we just didn't see it. So, what do we mean by aging reversal? What does it actually consist of? Does it mean that if you have an old arthritic joint that's killing you and you go on our treatment, that's going to rejuvenate and go back to where it was before? Well, I'm not so sure that it will, right? There may be some things that do turn into damage after a while, and once things are actual damage and not just physiological patterning that's been changed, in other words, once you go beyond signaling, then you may end up with structural changes that are hard to reverse. So we don't have any clue about that. On the other hand, there's some interesting dimensions to even that sort of thing, because one of the side effects of growth hormone is it tends to make your joints ache. And why does it do that? It's because it's making your cartilage grow back, and it's making your bones want to grow again. Your bones can't grow because after puberty, your epiphyses close, and you just can't do that. So you're setting up a contradiction between what the bone wants to do, what the cartilage wants to do, and what is possible biologically. But I speculate, and it's pure speculation, we have zero evidence for this, but I speculate that may be a good thing, because it may build up your cartilage so that then when you stop treatment and you go back to aging again, you're starting off with better cartilage, and you may actually postpone arthritis to an older age. So we don't know, but that's just one of those additional things that we look forward to exploring in more detail in the future.
Well, that's an absolutely fascinating story. I absolutely love hearing about how the sort of trial came to be and the amazing results. And that sort of, very well sort of segues me on to my next question, which is the trial that I believe you're running at the moment. So off the back of the success of the first trial, you, I think it's Interstitial Immune, last year started recruiting for a larger phase 2 trial. So could you just tell me a little bit about that? Is it ongoing at the moment? And can anyone participate in this trial, or are you at sort of data analysis stage?
Right. So we did start recruiting. We actually enrolled our first cohort at the beginning of Thanksgiving week in the United States, near the end of November. And we have enrolled 2 cohorts in December and a couple of cohorts in January. We're still recruiting now, still enrolling people now. So because of the COVID situation, we had to sort of rethink how we did these trials. In TRIM, we had people report physically for examination by our trial physician and to get initial blood testing done and to get various scans done. So we scanned everybody for their thymic structure at baseline using MRI at Stanford, their research MRI unit. And we wanted to be very consistent about that. And so we had people come back at various intervals for that. But with COVID, you can't do that sort of thing as easily. So we have 2 modes of entry into the trial now. One is in person, as it was before, and one is just by telemedicine approaches, essentially by Zoom meetings. So we have a Zoom physical, which you can get from our trial physician. It's not the same in the sense he can't feel you to make sure that you feel right, but he can evaluate you in various ways. So, for example, we have a test in which you sit in a chair, a firm chair with no arms, and you stand up and sit down as many times as you can in 30 seconds. And that's a measure of your frailty. So if you look good by measures like that, we also have a neurocognitive exam that you can do over the internet. It takes maybe 10 minutes for that to see how you're thinking. And we're hoping that we can actually show possibly neurocognitive improvements and maybe improvements in other things like frailty in some of our people. So these are things that can be done online, but there are things that need to be done in person. So we will be scanning the thymus in some cases, and we're using the opportunity to also scan for coronary artery calcium deposition, which is related to your risk of getting, heart attacks and so forth in the future. And we also have some exercise physiology testing that we do because your ability to raise your metabolic rate in response to exercise is strongly correlated with your risk of death. And if we could show changes, favorable changes in those kinds of endpoints, it would be fantastic. But it's optional. It has to be optional because not everybody can travel to our center in Southern California. So we're currently based at the Lundquist Institute, which is part of the Harbor UCLA complex, formerly called Harbor UCLA, in Southern California in Torrance. And so we have access to the scanning and exercise testing facilities. And people who are local or who wish to travel, and some have. So we've had one volunteer fly out to us from the East Coast. Anyone who wants to show up in person can. Of course, you have to wear a mask and you have to be socially distanced and all of that. We respect all of that. And ideally, if you can get vaccinated before you come out, that's even better. But it's possible. So you can come out and meet us in person. We get to meet you in person. But even if you sign up by telemedicine, we meet everybody online. And one of the benefits of this trial, at least in TRIM, and it seems the same is true of the current trial, which we're calling TRIM-X for the extension of the TRIM trial, is that the people that you meet are just cool people, right? People who sign up for this, they're not your ordinary person. They're people that know a lot. and they're smart and they're interesting, right?
It's not just men in this trial, is it? It's you're going a bit broader with the inclusion criteria.
That's correct. So we do have women in the trial. It took a fair amount of study to figure out how to handle women. We're finding that women do differ from men, in case you hadn't noticed that before. And we're loving having them in the trial. We also have people in the trial out to the age of 80 years. We had one guy just squeak in recently because he was going to turn 81 in a few days, and we got him enrolled just before that happened, and we had to exclude him. But we're also looking at people as young as 40. So far, we haven't really enrolled anybody that young yet, but we have several people who are interested, and we'll probably be enrolling them over the next few months. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask, are you keeping the treatment protocol exactly the same as the first trial, or are you tweaking it slightly?
We are actually tweaking it a little bit. So we're taking advantage of what we learned in TRIM to accelerate the insulin mitigation aspect of it. So in TRIM, we phased things in. So we started everybody with growth hormone alone, and then after a week, we gave them growth hormone plus DHEA, and after another week, we gave them all three medications so we could parse out the effects of these things on men and made sure that each one of these drugs was given for a good reason, that it actually had an effect. So we proved that each one of these drugs did have a good effect. So now we don't have to do that again. So now if you're a man, you just start right off on all three. And then, of course, we optimize after that. But with women, it was necessary to go through that same process again. So the women are getting the step-by-step procedure, and we're learning a lot from that. So that's one way in which we're tweaking the protocol. Hopefully, at least for the men, it will be an even more effective protocol because you're not going to have unmitigated insulin exposure for that very short period of time at the beginning of the trial. There's some other things that we're looking at as well, but I'm not ready to talk about those yet. But they're designed essentially to reduce the possibility of side effects and actually to enhance the likelihood that the treatment will be more effective in regenerating the thymus. But these are minor things from an FDA point of view. And so the FDA had no problem with us including these little extra tweaks in the protocol.
So in this trial, what are the sort of primary and secondary outcome measures going to be? Are they going to be primarily sort of thymus regeneration like they were before, or are you going to look more broadly at the actual age reversal possibly?
Right. So really the most primary endpoint this time is the epigenetic aging reversal, partly because that was one of the more robust responses that we saw in TRIM, and partly because it's so important. It's just really important that we document that effect and verify that we can reproduce that effect. So we're going to be looking at that again, but we also want to, again, verify that immune cell populations improve in the right direction. And we're also hoping to do some T-cell challenge experiments to show that the T-cells that we produce are more functional as well. So not just that we have more naive T-cells, but that when those are combined with all the other T-cells in your body, the net effect on your ability of your T-cells to respond to antigenic challenges is increased. And that's a little bit of a challenge because T-cell stimulation tests typically have incredibly noisy results. You just get data that's all over the map, but we're going to use the same statistical device that we used in TRIM to filter out all the noise by normalizing each volunteer to his or her own baseline. So the beauty of this is you can take a blood sample before you start treatment and challenge the T-cells and get a response. And then you can take another blood sample, which is completely independent from the first, and then do the same challenge at the end of the trial and then compare the responses over time. That allows you to subtract out the baseline without sort of giving the immune system any pre-challenge globally, which would tend to bias it in favor of, in increased response. In other words, it's not like we're vaccinating you and then we're challenging you with the same vaccine again. All of the challenges are done in the test tube.
So what would constitute a successful trial? When you look at it once it's done, from your viewpoint now, what would you deem a success?
I would be very happy if we show in women and in older people that we can regrow the thymus, because there's no data on thymus regeneration in women. There's no data on thymus regeneration after the age of 65. In fact, there was no data on thymus regeneration as a function of age in humans at all up to the point we did the TRIM trial. And in TRIM, we saw no difference in thymus regeneration if you were 50 or if you were 65, or say 51 or 65. But we don't know what happens after the age of 65. So we want to find that out, because we want to find out if there's going to be a limit, an age limit beyond which you can no longer benefit from this treatment. And we're hoping, of course, that there won't be, or that it will be sometime after the age of 80, but we have no idea. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, because the number of people who are going to be scanned is not 100% of the number of people who are in the trial. So we're going to have a fairly large N value, so that the number of people who actually get scanned gets up to the point where we'll have enough data to analyze. But if the TRIM trial is any indication, the thymus regeneration data are so robust that it's possible to show statistically significant thymus regeneration in single individuals. And if we can do that on even a handful of single individuals, that will be breaking new ground and educating us about how far we can extend this. Because, of course, we want to help as many people as possible. If we can show that we can benefit you, even if you're 80, that's really, really good news. So that's one of the things that will make the trial a success, is if we can get that bear on this point. And then, of course, if we can replicate the epigenetic aging results, and ideally, if we can show improvements in T cell functionality, that would be really great. And there are many other things we'd love to be able to do, but we're limited by budgets, and so we have to be parsimonious about what we shoot for. But if we could show, for example, a reduction in frailty, or an improvement in, of all things, and I'm not expecting this, but if we could show an improvement in coronary artery calcification, or in cardiac size and shape with our treatment, that would be fantastic. So we will just have to see how all of that turns out. But that's all blue sky stuff. So we don't consider those kinds of endpoints primary. Those are secondary endpoints and speculative right now.
Well, it's all absolutely fascinating stuff, and I hope all that does come to fruition. And we were just talking off air before about it possibly going international. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so it's difficult primarily because there's two major problems. One is that we have to analyze your blood, and that means we have to have access to your blood in a reasonable time frame. So if you're living in Antarctica or something, it's going to take much time for us to get your blood. We're not going to be able to keep it alive during the transport back to our labs. So we need to be able to work with people who have access to the blood lab that we have a national account with, which is Quest. And anyone in the United States, generally speaking, has access to a local Quest, a diagnostics lab. And so they can be enrolled, they can be tested, we can get blood results done in timely fashion if you're in the United States. When you get over into Europe, it starts getting more difficult, but we still think it could be stretched using, courier delivery, FedEx delivery, that sort of thing. But the best, and we're working on that. We have some links into Germany to establish partnerships with local blood testing labs in Germany, so we can get at least some of the tests done in Germany. And then many of the other tests can be done on frozen cells. So if the cells can be frozen and shipped to us frozen, then we can bank them and then thaw them out later and run those assays later on. That would also solve the distance problem. But the overseas opportunity that we see coming online, the first is in the UK. So there is a nice institute in the UK that's quite interested in exploring our treatment, and we're working with them to make that available sometime, hopefully in the next few months. But we'll have to see how that works out. Naturally, in real life, everything always takes 10 times longer than you expected. But there are certainly possibilities of offering the treatment in the UK in the foreseeable future.
Amazing. Well, that's music to my ears. If you ever need anyone under 30, then give me a shout. But I realise we're running over time slightly, so I've just got one final question, and it's what one aspect of longevity or the aging field at the moment most excites you, and you're not allowed to pick your own. And what do you envisage for the future of longevity?
Yeah, so one of the great things about this field right now is that there's so many exciting things that are taking place right now, and I have a little bit of trepidation about naming a few of my favorites because I may undervalue some of the other ones, which are great as well. But I'm really excited about epigenetic reprogramming. Unfortunately, that has a way to go before we're going to be able to apply that to people, I'm afraid. But I like that. I like what Liz Parrish is doing, with gene therapy. There's an effort being made now to map out something I've dubbed the senesome, which is the total population of mRNA transcripts that changes that bring about the aging process that we see. And if we could trace how that happens, we could begin to find out what changes upstream that we could block to prevent the downstream changes that manifest themselves as aging. So that effort has not quite gotten funded yet, but there's a wonderful paper out of Weiss Corey's lab that came out last year that's making a big contribution toward that, at least with mice. But we need studies like that in people too. I like simple things like Irina Conboy's ability to reset aging by removing some of the old age factors that are probably driving it. You just take your blood, take out half of your old plasma, throw it away, replace it with saline solution, basically, and suddenly a lot of aspects of aging are reset to the youthful value, which again speaks to what aging is and where it comes from, and whether it's wear and tear or whether it's actually an active commission, as I think that it is, and as I think that the experiment illustrates. And then related to that, there's Harold Katcher's epigenetic rejuvenation study in rats, in which he showed radical changes using a young plasma fraction. And actually, I'm working with Harold's group right now to see if we can replicate his rat results in dogs. So I have access to a dog colony, and there's some old dogs in the colony. We're going to see if we can rejuvenate those dogs starting perhaps next month or something like that. So we'll see how that goes. So there's just a lot of things going on. I know George Church is into wonderful things. David Sinclair's, the story of NAD that he started back in 2013 is so exciting and so sweeping in its implications. There's bound to be all kinds of exciting things that come out of that. And in the end, these things are all related to each other in some way or the other. But, it's like the old myth of the elephant. We can see a tusk over here and a tail over here and a leg over here. We still don't see the entire elephant, but we're beginning to form that picture. And that's very exciting in and of itself. So I'm just bursting with excitement about what's happening at aging, but we have to live long enough for all of that promise to come to fruition. So that's why I like my treatment, even though I'm not allowed to choose it, because it will maybe help us live a little bit longer so we can have a better chance of benefiting from all of these other things that are coming down the pike.
Yeah, I mean, what a fascinating answer, and I completely attest to what you're saying. We spoke to the Conboys and Harold Katcher not too long ago, actually, and yeah, listening to what they're doing is just brilliant as well. So I think we'll leave it there. Where can people find out about your work or keep up to date with what you're doing?
So it's pretty simple. So the name of the company is Intervene Immune, because we want to intervene in the immune system aging process. And my name is Fahy, F-A-H-Y. So if you write to me at gfahy, G-F-A-H-Y, at interveneimmune.com, then I will get your email and we can start a dialogue.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, we wish you luck with everything that you've got coming up. So again, thank you very much. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much. I did enjoy it. And I see that there have been many questions that have come up on the chat, which I have not had time to address, but perhaps offline I can have a look at those and see if I can answer any of those questions that may have come up.
I kept one eye on it. I think we covered a lot, but yeah, there might be some extras. So we'll definitely get any unanswered ones to you. But yeah,
Okay.
thanks again. Cheers.
You're welcome. Take care. Be well.